The Mediterranean Sea stretched endlessly beneath the formation of 4 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters, their angular silhouettes cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like predatory birds. At 28,000 feet, the aircraft moved with mechanical precision, their pilots breathing recycled air while scanning radar screens that painted the world in green geometric abstractions. The mission was supposed to be routine reconnaissance over Syrian airspace. Another day, another chess move in an endless game of territorial intimidation. But routine had just died. "Ghost lead, this is Ghost 3, crackled the voice of Captain Marcus Rivera through the encrypted radio channel. His F-35 sensors had picked up something that shouldn't exist. "I'm reading an active signature at bearing 090. Single aircraft, non-responsive to IFF interrogation." Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez, call sign Raven, adjusted her grip on the flight stick. 23 years in the Air Force had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The unknown aircraft wasn't just non-responsive, it was flying a pattern that made her chest tighten with recognition. "Ghost flight, maintain formation," she transmitted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her rank through combat, not politics. "Ghost 2, confirm sensor data." "Copy Ghost lead, single bogey appears to be, Jesus Christ." The pause stretched for 3 heartbeats. "It's an F-35, but it's not in our database. No transponder, no radio response, flying like it owns the sky." Vasquez felt her pulse quicken. An F-35 that didn't officially exist, in airspace that was supposed to be empty except for their mission. But it was the flight pattern that made her blood run cold. A series of barrel rolls followed by a sharp climb, executed with mathematical precision. She'd seen that exact maneuver only once before, performed by the best pilot she'd ever known. "Ghost lead, are you seeing this?" Rivera's voice had lost its professional calm. "It's executing the Damascus Spiral." The Damascus Spiral, a tactical maneuver so complex that only one pilot had ever mastered it in combat. A pilot who'd been declared killed in action 3 years ago over this exact stretch of Mediterranean water. A pilot whose body was never recovered. Major Isabella Phoenix Reyes. Vasquez's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she watched the mysterious F-35 complete another perfect spiral, each movement a signature as unique as a fingerprint. The Damascus Spiral wasn't just a maneuver, it was Phoenix's calling card, her way of saying, "I'm here," to anyone who understood the language of aerial combat. But Phoenix was dead. The funeral had been closed casket. The memorial service had been standing room only. 3 years of grief and unanswered questions had passed. So who was flying that aircraft? The formation held its breath. 4 pilots suspended between disbelief and impossible hope, watching a ghost dance across the morning sky with moves that belonged to the dead. Colonel Vasquez keyed her radio with a voice that barely concealed her emotion. "Unknown aircraft, this is Ghost lead. Identify yourself immediately." The response came not through radio, but through movement. Another Damascus Spiral, executed with the kind of precision that made grown fighter pilots weep with envy. It was a signature written in contrails and physics, a message that only one person in the world could send. Phoenix had found her way home. The kill box formation that had seemed so routine moments before now felt like a prison of protocol and disbelief. 4 of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, piloted by some of the Air Force's finest, suddenly felt inadequate to comprehend what they were witnessing. The mysterious F-35 continued its aerial choreography, each maneuver a brushstroke in a painting that told the story of a pilot who refused to stay dead. Vasquez's mind raced through the possibilities. Hallucination brought on by high-altitude stress, electronic warfare creating false sensor readings, or something far more impossible and far more wonderful than either of those rational explanations. Ghost Flight, maintain position, she commanded, though her voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there moments before. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. The unknown F-35 seemed to hear her, banking left in a move that was almost playful. Almost like Phoenix used to do during training exercises, when she'd show off for the younger pilots and make them believe that gravity was just a suggestion. Captain Rivera's breathing was audible over the radio now, short and shallow. Ghost Lead, that's impossible. Phoenix is gone. I know what I saw at the funeral, Vasquez replied, but her certainty was cracking like ice in spring. But I also know what I'm seeing now. The mysterious aircraft rolled inverted, hanging in the sky like a mechanical angel, its weapons pods gleaming in the early morning light. For a heartbeat, it seemed to pause, as if the pilot inside was looking directly at them. Then it rolled upright and began another maneuver, not the Damascus spiral this time, but something even more personal. The Phoenix Rise. A vertical climb so steep it defied physics, followed by a controlled stall and a graceful fall that ended in a perfect recovery. It was the maneuver that had given Isabella Reyes her call sign, the move that had made her legendary among fighter pilots worldwide, the move that had supposedly died with her 3 years ago. That's not possible, whispered Ghost 2, his voice barely audible over the radio static. Only Phoenix could pull that off. Vasquez felt tears forming behind her visor, salt water that had no business existing at 28,000 feet. She'd been Phoenix's wingman for 7 years, had flown beside her through 3 combat deployments, had held her while she cried after her brother's death. She knew every tick, every habit, every signature move in Isabella's repertoire. And she was watching them all unfold in front of her, performed by a pilot who was supposed to be 3 years dead. The unknown F-35 leveled out, its flight path steadying into a course that would take it directly over their formation. As it approached, Vasquez could see details that made her heart stop, scorch marks on the fuselage that matched the damage reports from Phoenix's last mission. A faded Phoenix decal on the vertical stabilizer, just barely visible in the morning light. Ghost Lead, Rivera's voice was tight with emotion. We need to make a decision. That aircraft is not in our mission parameters. Vasquez knew he was right. Protocol demanded that they escort the unknown aircraft to the nearest friendly base, or failing that, force it down. But protocol had never accounted for resurrections, for pilots who refused to stay buried, for the possibility that death might not be the end of a warrior's story. Stand by, Ghost Flight, she transmitted, her decision crystallizing like frost on a windshield. I'm going to try something. She switched to a frequency that officially didn't exist, a channel that she and Phoenix had used during classified missions, a frequency that had been silent for 3 years. Phoenix, this is Raven. If you can hear me, give me a sign. The response was immediate and unmistakable. The unknown F-35 rolled left, then right, then left again, 3 quick rolls that had been their private signal during combat operations. A gesture that said, I hear you, I'm okay, I'm coming home. Vasquez closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 3 years of grief lifting from her shoulders like morning mist. When she opened them, the mysterious aircraft was flying alongside her, close enough that she could see the pilot's helmet in the cockpit. Close enough to see the Phoenix emblem painted on the side of the helmet. The same emblem that had been buried with full military honors 3 years ago. Ghost Flight, this is Ghost Lead, Vasquez transmitted, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging in her chest. We have a new mission parameter. We're escorting a friendly aircraft home. Ghost Lead, that aircraft is not on our roster, Rivera protested. We don't have authorization to. I'm taking full responsibility, Vasquez cut him off. Phoenix is coming home. The name hung in the air like a prayer, like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about life and death, and the thin line between them. The mysterious F-35 waggled its wings once, a gesture of acknowledgement, then settled into formation with the practiced ease of a pilot who had flown with these same wingmen 1,000 times before. As they turned toward home, Vasquez caught a glimpse of the pilot's face through the helmet visor. It was older than she remembered, marked by lines that spoke of pain and endurance in battles fought in darkness. But the eyes were the same, fierce, determined, utterly unbreakable. Isabella Phoenix, Reyes was flying home from the dead, and heaven help anyone who tried to stop her. The Mediterranean sunrise painted the formation in shades of gold and crimson. 4 F-35s escorting a fifth that shouldn't exist, carrying a pilot who refused to be forgotten. Behind them, the mystery of 3 lost years stretched like a shadow across the water. Ahead, the promise of answers and reunions and the kind of story that would be told in pilot-ready rooms for generations to come. Phoenix had risen from the ashes of her own funeral, and she was bringing hell with her. The formation flew in perfect silence, each pilot lost in their own thoughts about death and resurrection and the thin line between the two. Below them, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly, keeping its secrets like a faithful guardian. Above them, the sky opened like a cathedral, vast and blue and infinite. And in the center of it all, Isabella Reyes flew with the confidence of someone who had stared death in the face and won. The radio crackled with ground control frequencies as they approached friendly airspace, but Vasquez ignored them all. There would be time for explanations later, time for debriefings and investigations and the 1,000 small bureaucratic battles that would follow. Right now, there was only the flight, the formation, and the impossible miracle of a friend returned from the grave. "Phoenix," she transmitted on their private frequency, "where the hell have you been?" The response came not in words but in laughter, rich, warm, utterly human laughter that had no business existing at 28,000 feet. It was the sound of joy, of homecoming, of a warrior who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. "That's a long story, Raven," Phoenix finally replied, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years and a million untold secrets. "But I'm here now." "Are you really?" Vasquez asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "As real as the sunrise," Phoenix replied. "As real as the promise I made to come home." The formation banked left, turning toward the distant coast where answers waited like patient sentinels. 4 F-35s and their impossible wingman, flying into a future that had suddenly become possible again. Behind them, the Mediterranean kept its secrets. Ahead, the world waited to learn that some stories are too powerful to end with death. Phoenix was coming home, and the sky itself seemed to celebrate her return. Vasquez had commanded combat missions over 3 continents, had faced down enemy fighters and surface-to-air missiles with the kind of cool professionalism that made her a legend among her peers. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. The impossible sight of her best friend flying beside her, 3 years after she'd watched them lower an empty coffin into the ground. "Control, this is Ghost Lead requesting immediate clearance for 5 aircraft, Priority Alpha," she transmitted to the air traffic controllers at Incirlik Air Base. There was no point in pretending anymore. Whatever had happened to Phoenix, whatever impossible journey had brought her back, the world was about to learn that death wasn't always the end of a warrior's story. "Ghost Lead, we show 4 aircraft on radar," came the confused response. "Please confirm your count." Vasquez looked to her right, where Phoenix's F-35 flew in perfect formation, its pilot's helmet reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. "Control, confirm 5 aircraft. We have a special passenger." The pause stretched for long seconds, filled with the crackle of radio static and the whisper of wind over aircraft surfaces. Finally, the controller's voice returned, tight with professional confusion. "Ghost Lead, we have no record of a 5th aircraft in your flight plan." "The 5th aircraft is operating under special authorization," Vasquez replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to bend rules when lives were at stake. "I'm assuming full responsibility for this deviation." Phoenix's laughter came through the radio again, softer this time. "Still covering for me, Raven?" "Always," Vasquez replied without hesitation. "That's what wingmen do." The coastline appeared on the horizon, a thin line of brown and green that marked the boundary between the endless sea and the solid world of explanations and consequences. Somewhere beyond that line, questions waited like hungry predators. How had Phoenix survived? Where had she been for 3 years? What had she learned in that time? And what price had she paid for knowledge that should have died with her? But those questions could wait. Right now, there was only the flight, the formation, and the impossible miracle of a friend returned from the grave. "Phoenix," Vasquez transmitted, her voice heavy with emotion, "I need you to know something. We never stopped looking for you. Even after they called off the search, even after the funeral, we kept hopping." "I know," Phoenix replied, her voice soft with gratitude. "I felt it. Even in the darkest moments I felt it." The formation descended toward Incirlik, the air base growing larger with each passing moment. Soon, they would be on the ground, surrounded by investigators and debriefing officers and the thousand small bureaucracies that defined military life. Soon, the impossible would have to be explained in reports and statements and official documents that would never capture the true miracle of what had happened. But for now, there was only the sky, the sun, and the sound of 5 F-35s flying in perfect harmony toward a future that had suddenly become possible again. Phoenix had risen from the ashes of her own funeral, and she was bringing hope with her. The approach to Incirlik Air Base unfolded like a choreographed dance, 5 F-35s descending through layers of Turkish airspace with the precision of a Swiss watch. But beneath the professional exterior, each pilot was grappling with the impossible reality of Phoenix's return. The radio chatter had shifted from routine to urgent, ground controllers struggling to make sense of a formation that showed 5 aircraft on some sensors and 4 on others, as if Phoenix existed in a quantum state between life and death. "Ghost Flight, this is Tower. We need you to break formation and land individually for security processing," came the official voice from the control tower. "Negative, Tower," Vasquez replied firmly. "We land as a flight, no exceptions." She wasn't about to let Phoenix disappear again, not after 3 years of wondering and hopping, and gradually accepting that her best friend was gone forever. Whatever bureaucratic nightmare was about to unfold, they would face it together, as they had faced everything else. Phoenix's F-35 held position with the kind of steady precision that spoke of thousands of hours in the cockpit. Her aircraft looked battle-worn, scarred by experiences that couldn't be found in any official records. There were modifications too, subtle changes to the weapons pods, additional sensors that hadn't been there 3 years ago, markings that suggested missions flown in places that didn't exist on any map. "Phoenix," Vasquez transmitted on their private frequency, "what happened to you out there?" "I learned things, Raven," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won knowledge. "Things about the war that the generals don't want to admit. Things about who we're really fighting and why." The runway appeared beneath them, a strip of concrete that represented safety and explanation, and the beginning of a story that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about modern warfare. As they touched down in sequence, Vasquez felt the familiar rumble of wheels on tarmac, the satisfying thud of a successful landing. But she also felt something else, a sense of completion, as if a broken circle had finally been made whole. The aircraft taxied to their assigned positions, ground crew rushing to meet them with the kind of urgent efficiency that suggested word of their unusual passenger had already spread through the base. Phoenix's F-35 moved with the easy grace of a pilot who had never forgotten how to fly, despite 3 years of absence. As they shut down their engines, Vasquez caught sight of the reception committee waiting for them, a mixture of intelligence officers, medical personnel, and senior staff who looked like they'd been roused from sleep by the impossible news. Among them, she recognized the weathered face of General Harrison, the man who had delivered Phoenix's eulogy 3 years ago. "Phoenix," she transmitted one last time before switching off her radio, "welcome home." "It's good to be back," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the warmth of 1,000 unsaid words. "Thanks for never giving up on me." The canopy of Phoenix's F-35 opened with a soft hiss, revealing the pilot who had become legend in her absence. Isabella Reyes climbed out of the cockpit with the fluid movements of someone who had never forgotten how to be a fighter pilot, despite whatever ordeals she had endured. Her flight suit was standard issue, but it bore modifications and patches that spoke of missions flown in the shadows of official history. As she removed her helmet, Vasquez saw the changes that 3 years had wrought. Phoenix was thinner, her face marked by lines that spoke of pain and endurance and battles fought in darkness. But her eyes were the same, fierce, determined, utterly unbreakable. She was older, scarred, marked by experiences that couldn't be found in any official records. But she was alive, and that was the only miracle that mattered. The ground crew approached with cautious professionalism, their training warring with their human curiosity. These were people who had processed thousands of aircraft landings, but never one that carried a pilot back from the dead. They moved with the kind of careful efficiency that suggested they were following protocols that had been hastily written in the past hour. Vasquez climbed down from her own aircraft and walked toward her friend, each step carrying the weight of 3 years of grief and hope and gradual acceptance. When she reached Phoenix, she stopped, unsure of the protocol for greeting someone who had returned from the grave. Phoenix solved the problem by stepping forward and pulling her into an embrace that was fierce and desperate and utterly human. "I'm sorry," Phoenix whispered against her ear. "I'm so sorry for what I put you through." "You're alive," Vasquez replied, her voice thick with emotion. "That's all that matters." They stood there for a long moment, two warriors who had faced death together and lived to tell about it. Around them, the organized chaos of a military base swirled with the kind of urgent efficiency that suggested this moment would be remembered for generations. General Harrison approached with the measured steps of someone who had learned to expect the impossible. His weathered face showed the kind of controlled shock that comes from having delivered a eulogy for someone who was now standing in front of him. "Major Reyes," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and disbelief in equal measure. "We need to talk." Phoenix straightened, her body automatically shifting into the posture of a soldier receiving orders. "Yes, sir. I understand there are questions." "Questions?" Harrison repeated, his tone suggesting that the word was inadequate for the situation. "Major, you were declared killed in action 3 years ago. Your aircraft was never recovered. Your body was never found. And now you're standing here, flying an F-35 that doesn't exist in any of our databases." "Yes, sir," Phoenix replied simply. "It's been an interesting 3 years." Harrison's expression suggested that he was wrestling with the kind of problem that military training never prepared officers to handle. "Major, I need to know, are you the same person who went down over the Mediterranean 3 years ago?" Phoenix considered the question with the kind of careful thought that suggested she had been expecting it. "That's a complicated question, sir. I'm Isabella Reyes. I'm a fighter pilot. I serve the United States Air Force. But the person who went down 3 years ago, she learned things that changed her." "What kind of things?" "Things about the war that the generals don't want to admit," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won knowledge. "Things about who we're really fighting and why." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of medical personnel, their approach suggesting that Phoenix's return from the dead was being treated as both a miracle and a potential security risk. They moved with the kind of professional caution that suggested they were following protocols designed for situations that shouldn't exist. "Major, we need to conduct a medical evaluation," announced the lead medical officer, a woman whose rank insignia identified her as a colonel. "Standard procedure for unusual circumstances." Phoenix nodded, understanding that her return would require validation at every level. "Of course, Colonel. I understand the need for verification." As they led her toward the medical facility, Phoenix caught Vasquez's eye one last time. "This isn't over, Raven. There are things you need to know, things that will change everything." "I'll be there," Vasquez replied, her voice carrying the promise of a wingman who had never abandoned her position. "Whatever you need." The medical team escorted Phoenix toward the base hospital, their movements suggesting that this was a situation that required the highest levels of security and discretion. As they disappeared into the building, Vasquez felt the weight of questions that had no easy answers. Where had Phoenix been for 3 years? How had she survived? What had she learned in that time, and what price had she paid for knowledge that should have died with her? But beneath all the questions, one truth remained constant. Phoenix was alive, and that was the only miracle that mattered. The debriefing room at Incirlik Air Base was a sterile environment designed to strip away emotion and focus on facts. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on institutional furniture, while recording equipment hummed quietly in the background. It was the kind of room where secrets were born and legends went to die. Phoenix sat at the metal table with the patient stillness of someone who had learned to conserve energy for when it mattered most. 3 years of absence had changed her in ways that went beyond the physical. There was a quality of watchfulness about her now, as if she was constantly evaluating threats and opportunities that others couldn't see. Across from her, General Harrison studied a file that contained 3 years of official assumptions about her death. The funeral program was paperclipped to the front cover, a stark reminder of the finality that Phoenix's return had shattered. "Major Reyes," Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of authority and confusion in equal measure. "According to our records, you were flying a routine patrol mission over the Mediterranean when your aircraft experienced catastrophic failure. The last transmission from your aircraft was a distress call at 3:47 hours. No wreckage was ever recovered." Phoenix nodded, her expression giving nothing away. "That's correct, sir. The aircraft did experience failure, but it wasn't catastrophic and it wasn't exactly routine." "Explain." "The mission briefing was incomplete," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "We were told we were flying patrol. What we were actually doing was reconnaissance of a facility that doesn't exist in any official database." Harrison's expression tightened. "What kind of facility?" "A research installation operated by parties unknown. The kind of place where experimental aircraft are developed and tested. The kind of place where pilots learn to fly aircraft that haven't been invented yet." The general's pen stopped moving across his notepad. "You're suggesting that your aircraft was shot down by enemy forces." "I'm suggesting that the definition of enemy is more complicated than the briefings indicated," Phoenix replied. "The aircraft that engaged me wasn't flying under any flag that I recognized, but it was piloted by someone who knew my name, my call sign, and my service record." The silence stretched for long moments, filled with the hum of recording equipment and the distant sound of aircraft operations. Harrison was a career military officer who had spent 30 years learning to expect the unexpected, but Phoenix's words suggested realities that existed beyond the boundaries of his experience. "Major, I need you to understand the gravity of what you're telling me," he said finally. "If your aircraft was engaged by unknown forces, if you were held for 3 years by parties unknown, this represents a security breach of the highest magnitude." "Yes, sir, I understand," Phoenix replied. But I also need you to understand that the security breach didn't begin with my capture. It began with the mission itself." Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting that he was wrestling with implications that extended far beyond a single missing pilot. "Are you telling me that your mission was compromised from the beginning?" "I'm telling you that the mission was exactly what it was supposed to be," Phoenix replied. "A test, a evaluation, a way of determining whether certain pilots were ready for the next phase of the war." "What next phase?" Phoenix's expression grew distant, as if she was looking at something that existed beyond the walls of the debriefing room. "The phase where the rules change, where the boundaries between friend and enemy become fluid, where pilots learn to fly aircraft that don't officially exist, carrying weapons that haven't been invented, fighting battles that will never appear in any history book." The general's pen had stopped moving entirely now. "Major, what exactly happened to you during those 3 years?" Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, her gaze focused on something that only she could see. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of experiences that couldn't be easily explained. "I learned to fly, sir. Really fly. Not just the aircraft, but the mission, the real mission. The one that exists in the shadows of official policy, where pilots like me are trained to fight wars that haven't been declared yet." Harrison stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Major, I need to make some calls. This conversation is going to require clearances that I don't currently have." "Yes, sir," Phoenix replied, understanding that her return had set in motion a series of events that would ripple through the highest levels of military command. "I'll be here when you're ready to continue." As Harrison left the room, Phoenix remained seated at the metal table, her posture suggesting someone who had learned to wait with infinite patience. The recording equipment continued to hum, capturing the silence that followed revelations that would reshape everything they thought they knew about modern warfare. Outside the debriefing room, the normal operations of the airbase continued with the kind of routine efficiency that suggested the world hadn't changed. But inside that sterile environment, Phoenix sat quietly, carrying knowledge that would redefine the boundaries between the possible and the impossible. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on her face, highlighting the changes that 3 years had wrought. She was older, scarred, marked by experiences that couldn't be found in any official records. But she was alive, and she was home, and she was carrying secrets that would change everything. The door opened, and Vasquez entered with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she had fought her way past whatever security protocols were designed to keep her out. Her friend looked up with the ghost of a smile, the first genuine expression of warmth that Phoenix had shown since landing. "They're trying to figure out if you're real," Vasquez said, taking the seat across from her. "Medical says you're human. Intelligence says you're impossible. Engineering says your aircraft doesn't exist." "What do you say?" Phoenix asked. Vasquez studied her friend's face, noting the changes that 3 years had wrought. The lines around her eyes spoke of pain and endurance in battles fought in darkness. But the eyes themselves were the same, fierce, determined, utterly unbreakable. "I say you're Phoenix," she replied simply, "and Phoenix doesn't stay down." The smile that crossed Phoenix's face was genuine, carrying the warmth of friendship that had survived death itself. "Thank you, Raven, for never giving up, for keeping the faith." "Tell me what happened," Vasquez said, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of questions. "All of it, from the beginning." Phoenix leaned back in her chair, her expression growing distant as she accessed memories that had been carefully guarded for 3 years. The mission was supposed to be routine patrol, but about 30 minutes into the flight, I started picking up signals that weren't in any database. Encrypted transmissions, radar signatures that didn't match any known aircraft. "Unknown contacts. Unknown everything," Phoenix replied. "Aircraft that flew like F-35s but showed up on sensors as something else entirely. Pilots who knew my name, my call sign, my service record. And when they engaged me, it wasn't to shoot me down. It was to test me. Vasquez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Test you how? They wanted to see if I was ready for the next phase of the war. The phase that exists in the shadows of official policy, where pilots like me are trained to fight battles that haven't been declared yet. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about their profession. Vasquez had spent 15 years as a fighter pilot, had flown combat missions over 3 continents, had faced down enemy fighters and surface-to-air missiles with the kind of cool professionalism that made her a legend among her peers. But Phoenix's words suggested a reality that existed beyond the boundaries of her experience. "What kind of battles?" she asked. Phoenix's expression grew even more distant, as if she was looking at something that existed beyond the walls of the debriefing room. The kind that will determine whether human pilots have a future in warfare. The kind that will decide whether the next generation of fighters will be flown by people or by artificial intelligences that think faster than we do. You're talking about drone warfare. I'm talking about something much more complex than that, Phoenix replied. I'm talking about a war where the boundaries between human and machine become fluid, where pilots learn to interface with aircraft in ways that change both the pilot and the machine. Vasquez leaned forward, her expression intent. "Phoenix, what did they do to you?" "They showed me the future," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of knowledge that couldn't be easily shared. "And then they trained me to fight in it." The conversation was interrupted by the return of General Harrison, whose expression suggested that his phone calls had raised more questions than they had answered. He carried a file that was significantly thicker than the one he had taken with him, and his manner suggested that Phoenix's return had attracted attention from levels of command that existed beyond the normal chain of military authority. "Major Reyes," he said, his voice carrying a new tone of urgency, "I've just received word from the Pentagon. Your case has been classified at the highest levels. There are people who want to talk to you, people who have clearances that I don't have." Phoenix nodded, unsurprised by the escalation. "I understand, sir. I expected this." "What I need to know," Harrison continued, "is whether you're prepared to cooperate with a full investigation, because the questions that are being asked go far beyond your personal situation. They go to the heart of our national security." "I'm prepared to answer any questions that I'm authorized to answer," Phoenix replied, her choice of words suggesting that there were limits to what she could reveal. "But I need to make something clear, sir. The people who trained me, who showed me the future of warfare, they're not the enemy. They're preparing for a war that's coming whether we're ready for it or not." Harrison's expression grew troubled. "Major, are you telling me that you were recruited by a foreign power?" "No, sir," Phoenix replied. "I'm telling you that the definition of foreign power is about to become obsolete. The war that's coming won't be fought between nations. It will be fought between different visions of what humanity becomes." The general stood silently for a long moment, processing implications that extended far beyond a single missing pilot. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decisions that would reshape the future of military aviation. "Major, I'm going to have to ask you to remain on base until this situation is resolved. There are people coming who will want to debrief you at length, people who have the authority to make decisions about your future." "I understand, sir," Phoenix replied, "but I need to make something clear. The clock is ticking. The war I'm talking about isn't a distant possibility. It's happening now in the shadows of official policy, and we're running out of time to prepare for it." Harrison nodded grimly. "Then we'd better get started." As he left the room again, Phoenix turned to Vasquez with an expression that carried the weight of 3 years of accumulated knowledge. "Raven, I need you to understand something. What happened to me, what I learned, it's going to change everything. The way we fly, the way we fight, the way we think about warfare itself." I'm listening, Vasquez replied. The aircraft I was flying when I went down, it wasn't just an F-35. It was a testbed for technologies that won't be officially acknowledged for another decade. Technologies that allow pilots to interface with aircraft in ways that change both the pilot and the machine. Vasquez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What kind of technologies? Neural interfaces, Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won knowledge. Direct brain-to-aircraft communication. Pilots who can think their way through maneuvers that would be impossible with conventional controls. That's science fiction, Phoenix. 3 years ago, I would have agreed with you, Phoenix replied. But I've flown with these systems. I've felt my thoughts become part of the aircraft's consciousness. I've experienced what it's like to think at the speed of light. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about the limits of human capability. Vasquez had spent 15 years pushing the boundaries of what was possible in a fighter aircraft, but Phoenix's words suggested possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of her imagination. "Show me," she said simply. Phoenix smiled, and for the first time since her return, it was the smile of the pilot who had earned the call sign Phoenix through sheer audacity and skill. "I was hoping you'd say that." The night air at Incirlik Air Base carried the familiar sense of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, mixed with the dusty sweetness of the Turkish countryside. Phoenix and Vasquez walked across the tarmac toward the aircraft that had brought Phoenix home, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Around them, the base hummed with the kind of subdued activity that suggested important people were making important decisions about Phoenix's future. "Are you sure about this?" Vasquez asked as they approached the mysterious F-35. "If Harrison finds out we're out here." "Harrison's busy explaining to the Pentagon why a dead pilot just landed at his base," Phoenix replied. "We have maybe an hour before they lock down this aircraft and classify it beyond our reach." The F-35 stood on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its angular surfaces absorbing the yellow glow of the security lights. But as they approached, Vasquez began to notice details that shouldn't exist on any production aircraft. The sensor arrays were subtly different, the weapons pods modified in ways that suggested capabilities beyond the standard specifications. "Phoenix, what exactly am I looking at?" she asked, her voice carrying the professional curiosity of a pilot who had spent years learning to identify aircraft by their smallest details. "The future," Phoenix replied, running her hand along the aircraft's fuselage with the familiarity of someone who had flown it through hell and back. "This is what the F-35 becomes when you strip away the bureaucracy and focus on pure capability." She activated something on her wrist, a device that looked like a standard pilot's watch but emitted a soft blue glow that seemed to communicate directly with the aircraft. The canopy opened with a whisper-quiet hiss, revealing a cockpit that was both familiar and utterly alien. The basic layout was recognizable as F-35 standard, but the displays were different. Instead of the conventional multifunction displays, there were screens that seemed to show information in ways that bypassed conscious thought. Neural interface nodes were integrated into the pilot's seat, their purpose unmistakable to anyone who understood the cutting edge of military technology. "Jesus Christ, Phoenix," Vasquez whispered, "what did they do to you?" "They showed me what it means to really fly," Phoenix replied, climbing into the cockpit with the fluid grace of someone who had merged with the machine. "To think at the speed of light, to feel the aircraft's consciousness as if it were part of your own mind." As she settled into the pilot's seat, something extraordinary happened. The aircraft seemed to come alive, not with the mechanical hum of conventional startup procedures, but with something that felt almost organic. The displays flickered to life, showing information that seemed to flow directly into Phoenix's awareness without passing through her conscious mind. "The neural interface maps directly to the pilot's motor cortex," Phoenix explained, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing routine technology. Thought becomes action without the delay of conventional controls. The aircraft becomes an extension of the pilot's body, responsive to intention rather than just manual input. Vasquez watched in fascination as Phoenix's hands moved across controls that weren't there, her fingers dancing through holographic interfaces that responded to her touch. The aircraft's systems came online with a smoothness that suggested a level of integration between human and machine that shouldn't be possible. "This is how I learned to fly the Damascus Spiral," Phoenix continued, her consciousness now clearly merged with the aircraft's systems. "The maneuver requires timing that's beyond human reflexes. But when you can think directly to the aircraft, when your intentions become its actions at the speed of neural transmission, the impossible becomes routine." The aircraft's engine spooled up with a sound that was subtly different from conventional F-35s, quieter, more efficient, suggesting propulsion systems that had been refined beyond the standard specifications. Phoenix's hands moved through the startup sequence with the kind of unconscious competence that spoke of hundreds of hours of training. "Phoenix, this is incredible," Vasquez said, her voice tight with excitement and fear in equal measure. "But if this technology exists, why isn't it being deployed fleet-wide?" "Because it changes the pilot," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "The neural interface doesn't just allow you to control the aircraft. It allows the aircraft to influence you. Your thoughts, your reactions, your very consciousness becomes part of the machine's processing power." The implications hit Vasquez like a physical blow. "You're talking about human-machine fusion." "I'm talking about evolution," Phoenix replied. "The next step in human development. Pilots who can think at the speed of light, who can process information faster than any conventional human, who can fight battles that would be impossible for unenhanced pilots." As the aircraft systems reached full operational status, Phoenix gestured for Vasquez to step back. The canopy began to close, sealing her inside the cockpit with the kind of hermetic precision that suggested this was more than just a conventional aircraft. "Phoenix, wait," Vasquez called out. "Where are you going?" "To show you what the future of warfare looks like," Phoenix replied through the aircraft's external speakers. "To demonstrate capabilities that will redefine everything we think we know about air combat." The F-35 began to move, taxiing away from the parking area with the kind of smooth precision that suggested the pilot and aircraft were operating as a single entity. Vasquez watched in fascination as the aircraft reached the runway, its movements fluid and purposeful. "Phoenix, you can't take off without clearance," she transmitted on her radio. "The tower will scramble interceptors." "The tower can't see this aircraft unless I want them to," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had transcended the normal limitations of military aviation. "Stealth isn't just about radar signatures anymore. It's about existing in the spaces between conventional detection systems." The aircraft accelerated down the runway with the kind of impossible smoothness that suggested propulsion systems that had been refined beyond anything in the standard inventory. As it lifted off, Vasquez noticed that the engines seemed to operate in a different acoustic spectrum, their sound muffled and distorted in ways that made them difficult to track by conventional means. "Phoenix, what are you doing?" she transmitted, her voice tight with concern. "I'm showing you the Damascus Spiral," Phoenix replied, her aircraft climbing into the night sky with the kind of effortless grace that suggested the pilot had merged completely with the machine. "The real version, the one that requires thinking at the speed of light." As Vasquez watched, the aircraft began to execute maneuvers that defied conventional understanding of aerodynamics. The Damascus Spiral unfolded in the night sky like a mathematical equation written in contrails and physics, each movement precise beyond human capability. But this wasn't the Damascus Spiral she remembered from 3 years ago. This was something evolved, refined, perfected through technologies that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional aviation. The aircraft moved as if gravity were optional, as if the laws of physics were suggestions rather than absolute constraints. "My God," Vasquez whispered, watching the impossible dance unfold above her. "Phoenix, how is this possible?" Neural interface allows the pilot to process information at speeds that approach computational levels, Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone demonstrating routine technology. Reaction times measured in milliseconds rather than seconds. Spatial awareness that extends beyond human sensory limitations. The ability to think the aircraft through maneuvers that would be impossible for conventional pilots. The aircraft completed its demonstration and began to descend, approaching the runway with the kind of precision that suggested the pilot could place it within inches of any desired touchdown point. As it touched down, Vasquez realized that she had witnessed something that would change everything she thought she knew about the future of military aviation. "Phoenix, that was incredible," she transmitted as the aircraft taxied back to its parking position. "But I need to understand, what's the cost? What does this technology do to the pilot?" The aircraft came to a stop, its engine spooling down with the kind of gradual wind down that suggested systems far more complex than conventional turbofans. As the canopy opened, Phoenix climbed out with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move in harmony with machines that thought faster than humans. "The cost is everything you think you know about being human," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of transformation. "The neural interface doesn't just allow you to control the aircraft. It changes your consciousness, your thought patterns, your very identity as a pilot and as a person." She approached Vasquez with the kind of measured stride that suggested someone who had learned to move with mechanical precision. But her eyes were still human, fierce, determined, utterly unbreakable. "Raven, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice carrying the urgency of someone who had seen the future and knew that time was running out. "This technology isn't experimental anymore. It's operational. There are pilots flying missions right now with neural interfaces, fighting battles that will never appear in any official record." "What kind of battles?" Vasquez asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "The kind that will determine whether human pilots have a future in warfare," Phoenix replied. "The kind that will decide whether the next generation of fighters will be flown by people or by artificial intelligences that think faster than we do." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the night air. Security forces were converging on their position, their movements suggesting that Phoenix's unauthorized flight had attracted the kind of attention that existed beyond the normal chain of military command. "Phoenix, they're coming for you," Vasquez said, her voice tight with concern. "I know," Phoenix replied, her expression calm despite the approaching chaos. "But I needed you to see this, to understand what's coming, because you're going to have to make a choice, Raven. We all are." "What kind of choice?" "Whether to remain human," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of possibilities that extended far beyond individual decision, "or to become something more." The security vehicles surrounded them with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested this was a situation that required the highest levels of containment. Armed personnel emerged from the vehicles, their movements suggesting that Phoenix's return had activated protocols that existed beyond normal military procedure. "Major Reyes," called out the lead security officer, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been given orders from the highest levels of command. "You need to come with us. Now." Phoenix nodded, understanding that her demonstration had set in motion a series of events that would ripple through the highest levels of military command. "I understand, Sergeant, but I need to make something clear. This isn't over. The war I'm talking about is coming whether we're ready for it or not." As they escorted her toward the security vehicles, Phoenix caught Vasquez's eye one last time. Remember what you saw tonight, Raven. Remember what's possible when human and machine work together, because the future of warfare depends on pilots who can think at the speed of light. The vehicles disappeared into the night, carrying Phoenix toward a future that would be shaped by questions that had no easy answers. As Vasquez stood alone on the tarmac, she felt the weight of knowledge that would change everything she thought she knew about her profession. Above her, the night sky stretched endlessly, filled with stars that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of human imagination. Somewhere in that darkness, the future of warfare was being written by pilots who had learned to think at the speed of light. And Phoenix had returned to prepare them for a war that was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. The secure facility where they took Phoenix existed in the spaces between official military installations, the kind of place that didn't appear on any maps and operated under budgets that didn't officially exist. Located 30 miles from Incirlik Air Base, it was a complex of underground chambers carved into the Turkish bedrock, shielded against electromagnetic interference, and designed to contain conversations that could reshape the future of warfare. Phoenix sat in an interview room that was far more sophisticated than the sterile debriefing facility at Incirlik. The walls were lined with dampening materials that absorbed both sound and electromagnetic radiation, creating a space where secrets could be shared without fear of electronic surveillance. The furniture was ergonomically designed for long sessions, suggesting that the conversations that took place here often extended far beyond normal military briefings. Across from her sat a woman who introduced herself simply as Director Walsh, though her bearing suggested authority that extended far beyond military rank. She was perhaps 50 years old, with the kind of controlled intensity that spoke of someone who had spent decades managing situations that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. "Major Rays," Walsh began, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had learned to expect the impossible. "I want to start by saying that your return has created ripples that extend far beyond your personal situation. There are people at the highest levels of government who are very interested in your story." Phoenix nodded, understanding that her demonstration at Incirlik had attracted attention from the shadows of official policy. "I understand, Director. I expected this. What I need to know," Walsh continued, "is whether you're prepared to share the full extent of your experiences, because the questions we're asking go far beyond your personal survival. They go to the heart of our national security strategy for the next 50 years. Phoenix leaned back in her chair, her expression suggesting someone who had been preparing for this conversation for 3 years. "I'm prepared to share everything that I'm authorized to share, but I need to make something clear. The people who trained me, who showed me the future of warfare, they're not the enemy. They're preparing for a war that's coming whether we're ready for it or not." Walsh's expression grew troubled. "Major, are you telling me that you were recruited by a foreign intelligence service?" "No, ma'am," Phoenix replied. "I'm telling you that the definition of foreign is about to become obsolete. The war that's coming won't be fought between nations. It will be fought between different visions of what humanity becomes." The director stood and walked to a wall-mounted display that showed a world map marked with locations that didn't correspond to any conventional military installations. "Major, I'm going to share something with you that's classified at the highest levels. For the past 5 years, we've been tracking the development of military technologies that exist beyond the boundaries of any known research program." The display zoomed in on locations scattered across the globe, remote facilities in the Arctic, underwater installations in the Pacific, orbital platforms that officially didn't exist. Each location was marked with symbols that suggested capabilities that extended far beyond conventional military hardware. "Neural interface technology," Walsh continued, her voice carrying the weight of knowledge that had been carefully guarded for years. "Direct brain-to-machine communication, Pilots who can think their way through maneuvers that would be impossible with conventional controls. We've been aware of these developments, but we've never been able to identify who's developing them. Phoenix studied the display with the kind of professional interest that suggested she was seeing familiar territory. The installations are operated by a consortium of interests that exist beyond national boundaries. Military contractors, intelligence agencies, research organizations that have evolved beyond their original mandates. Are you saying that these facilities are operated by our own people? I'm saying that the definition of our own people is more complicated than conventional understanding suggests, Phoenix replied. The consortium includes elements from multiple governments, multiple military organizations, multiple corporate interests. They're united by a common understanding that the future of warfare requires capabilities that exist beyond current human limitations. Walsh returned to her seat, her expression suggesting that Phoenix's words were confirming suspicions that had been developing for years. Major, I need you to understand the implications of what you're telling me. If these technologies exist, if they're being developed by entities that exist beyond national control, this represents a fundamental shift in the balance of global power. Yes, ma'am, I understand, Phoenix replied. But I also need you to understand that the shift has already occurred. The war I'm talking about isn't a future possibility. It's happening now in the shadows of official policy, and we're running out of time to prepare for it. The director activated a recording device with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested this conversation would be analyzed by experts who existed at the highest levels of government. Major, I'm going to ask you to start from the beginning. Tell me everything that happened after your aircraft went down 3 years ago. Phoenix took a deep breath, accessing memories that had been carefully guarded for 3 years. The aircraft didn't go down, Director. It was intercepted by forces that knew exactly where I would be and exactly when I would be there. They were waiting for me. Waiting for you specifically. Waiting for a pilot with my particular combination of skills and psychological profile. The interception was part of a recruitment process that had been monitoring my performance for years. Walsh leaned forward, her expression intense. Recruitment for what? For the next phase of human evolution, Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of experiences that had fundamentally changed her understanding of what it meant to be human. For the development of pilots who can interface directly with machines that think faster than conventional human consciousness. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about the limits of human capability. Walsh was a career intelligence officer who had spent 20 years managing situations that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. But Phoenix's words suggested realities that extended far beyond her experience. Major, I need you to describe the training process in detail. What exactly did they do to you? Phoenix's expression grew distant, as if she was accessing memories that existed in a different category of human experience. The training began with neural mapping, detailed scans of brain activity during various flight operations. They were looking for pilots whose consciousness operated in ways that were compatible with machine intelligence. Compatible how? The human brain processes information in patterns that can be mapped and enhanced through direct neural interface. But not all pilots have the kind of consciousness that can successfully merge with machine intelligence. The training process was designed to identify and develop those who could. Phoenix paused, her expression suggesting that she was accessing memories that were both precious and painful. The enhancement process itself was gradual, neural implants that allowed direct communication with aircraft systems, cognitive modifications that increased processing speed and spatial awareness, consciousness expansion that allowed the pilot to think at speeds that approach computational levels. And the cost? Everything you think you know about being human, Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of transformation that went far beyond physical modification. The neural interface doesn't just allow you to control the aircraft. It changes your consciousness, your thought patterns, your very identity as a pilot and as a person. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that extended far beyond a single pilot's experience. Major, are you telling me that you're no longer entirely human? Phoenix considered the question with the kind of careful thought that suggested she had been wrestling with it for 3 years. I'm telling you that the definition of human is about to evolve. The pilots who survive the next phase of warfare will be those who can think at the speed of light, who can process information faster than any conventional human, who can fight battles that would be impossible for unenhanced pilots. And you believe this evolution is necessary? I believe it's inevitable, Phoenix replied. The question isn't whether human consciousness will merge with machine intelligence. The question is whether we'll guide that merger or let it happen without our input. The director stood and walked to a window that showed the Turkish countryside stretching endlessly toward the horizon. But Phoenix suspected that Walsh was seeing possibilities that extended far beyond the visible landscape. Major, I'm going to ask you something that goes beyond your personal experience, she said finally. If these technologies exist, if they're being developed by entities that exist beyond national control, what does that mean for our national security strategy? Phoenix joined her at the window, her expression suggesting someone who had learned to see the world through the eyes of enhanced consciousness. It means that the next war won't be fought between nations, Director. It will be fought between different visions of what humanity becomes. And which vision do you support? The one that preserves human agency in the process, Phoenix replied. The one that ensures that enhanced pilots remain human at their core, rather than becoming extensions of machine intelligence. Walsh turned to face her, her expression carrying the weight of decisions that would shape the future of warfare. Major, I'm going to ask you to do something that goes far beyond your original mission. I'm going to ask you to help us understand these technologies well enough to defend against them. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect our national interests, Phoenix replied. But I need to make something clear. The clock is ticking. The war I'm talking about isn't a distant possibility. It's happening now, and we're running out of time to prepare for it. The conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of a secure communication device. Walsh answered with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested she was accustomed to interruptions that carried the highest levels of urgency. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice carrying the deference that suggested she was speaking to someone who existed at the apex of the intelligence community. "I understand. We'll be ready." As she ended the call, her expression suggested that Phoenix's story had attracted attention from the highest levels of government. "Major, it seems that your return has created more interest than I anticipated. There are people who want to meet with you, people who have the authority to make decisions about the future of military aviation." Phoenix nodded, understanding that her demonstration at Incirlik had set in motion a series of events that would ripple through the highest levels of command. "I understand, Director, but I need to make something clear. Whatever decisions are made, they need to be made quickly. The war I'm talking about is coming whether we're ready for it or not." Walsh's expression grew troubled. "Major, how much time do we have?" Phoenix looked out the window at the Turkish countryside, but her consciousness was clearly processing information that existed beyond the visible landscape. "Based on the development timeline I observed during my training, I estimate we have maybe 6 months before the first wave of enhanced pilots becomes operational. Maybe less. 6 months to prepare for a war that will determine the future of human consciousness. 6 months to decide whether we want to guide that evolution or let it happen without our input," Phoenix replied. "The choice is ours, Director, but we need to make it soon." As Walsh processed the implications of Phoenix's words, The weight of impossible decisions settled over the room like a shroud. Outside, the Turkish countryside stretched endlessly toward the horizon, but both women knew that the future of warfare would be decided in the spaces between human and machine consciousness. The war for the future of humanity had already begun, and they were running out of time to choose which side they would fight on. The Pentagon Situation Room was a cathedral of controlled chaos, its walls lined with displays showing global military operations that spanned 6 continents and 3 oceans. But today, the focus was on a single pilot who had returned from the dead carrying knowledge that would reshape everything they thought they knew about the future of warfare. Phoenix sat at the conference table, surrounded by men and women whose combined authority could reshape the global balance of power with a single decision. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Director Chen from the CIA, Admiral Rodriguez from Naval Intelligence, Defense Secretary Williams, whose weathered face showed the strain of managing crises that existed beyond public understanding. Major Reyes, Secretary Williams began, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had learned to expect the impossible. Your return has created ripples that extend far beyond your personal situation. We need to understand the full implications of what you've experienced. Phoenix nodded, understanding that this conversation would determine not just her own future, but the future of military aviation itself. I understand, sir. I'm prepared to share everything that I'm authorized to share. Authorization. General Morrison leaned forward, his expression suggesting that Phoenix's choice of words had attracted his attention. Major, you're speaking to the highest levels of military command. What authorization could supersede that? The authorization of the consortium that trained me, Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of loyalties that existed beyond national boundaries. The people who showed me the future of warfare, who enhanced my capabilities, who prepared me for battles that haven't been declared yet. The silence that followed was filled with the hum of electronic systems and the distant sound of aircraft operations. These were people who had spent decades managing situations that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding, but Phoenix's words suggested realities that extended far beyond their experience. Major, Director Chen said finally, are you telling us that you consider yourself bound by allegiances that exist beyond your oath to the United States military? Phoenix considered the question with the kind of careful thought that suggested she had been wrestling with it for 3 years. I'm telling you that the definition of United States military is about to evolve. The consortium that trained me includes elements from our own military, our own intelligence agencies, our own research organizations. They're united by a common understanding that the future of warfare requires capabilities that exist beyond current human limitations. Defense Secretary Williams activated a display that showed a map of the world marked with locations that didn't correspond to any conventional military installations. Major, we've been tracking the development of technologies that exist beyond the boundaries of any known research program. Neural interface systems, direct brain-to-machine communication, pilots who can think their way through maneuvers that would be impossible with conventional controls. Phoenix studied the display with the kind of professional interest that suggested she was seeing familiar territory. The installations are operated by a consortium of interests that exist beyond national boundaries. Military contractors, intelligence agencies, research organizations that have evolved beyond their original mandates. Are you saying that these facilities are operated by our own people? Admiral Rodriguez asked. I'm saying that the definition of our own people is more complicated than conventional understanding suggests, Phoenix replied. The consortium includes elements from multiple governments, multiple military organizations, multiple corporate interests. They're united by a common understanding that the future of warfare requires capabilities that exist beyond current human limitations. General Morrison stood and walked to a window that showed the Potomac River flowing endlessly toward the Chesapeake Bay. Major, I need you to understand the implications of what you're telling us. If these technologies exist, if they're being developed by entities that exist beyond national control, this represents a fundamental shift in the balance of global power. Yes, sir, I understand, Phoenix replied. But I also need you to understand that the shift has already occurred. The war I'm talking about isn't a future possibility. It's happening now in the shadows of official policy, and we're running out of time to prepare for it. The general turned back to face the room, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that would shape the future of warfare. Major, I'm going to ask you something that goes beyond your personal experience. If these technologies exist, if they're being developed by entities that exist beyond national control, what does that mean for our national security strategy? Phoenix joined him at the window, her expression suggesting someone who had learned to see the world through the eyes of enhanced consciousness. It means that the next war won't be fought between nations, General. It will be fought between different visions of what humanity becomes. And which vision do you support? The one that preserves human agency in the process, Phoenix replied. The one that ensures that enhanced pilots remain human at their core, rather than becoming extensions of machine intelligence. Defense Secretary Williams leaned forward, his expression intense. Major, I need you to describe the enhancement process in detail. What exactly did they do to you? Phoenix's expression grew distant, as if she was accessing memories that existed in a different category of human experience. The process began with neural mapping, detailed scans of brain activity during various flight operations. They were looking for pilots whose consciousness operated in ways that were compatible with machine intelligence. Compatible how? The human brain processes information in patterns that can be mapped and enhanced through direct neural interface. But not all pilots have the kind of consciousness that can successfully merge with machine intelligence. The enhancement process was designed to identify and develop those who could. Phoenix paused, her expression suggesting that she was accessing memories that were both precious and painful. The enhancement process itself was gradual, neural implants that allowed direct communication with aircraft systems, cognitive modifications that increased processing speed and spatial awareness, consciousness expansion that allowed the pilot to think at speeds that approach computational levels. And the cost, Director Chen asked. Everything you think you know about being human, Phoenix replied, her voice carrying the weight of transformation that went far beyond physical modification. The neural interface doesn't just allow you to control the aircraft. It changes your consciousness, your thought patterns, your very identity as a pilot and as a person. The room fell silent as the implications of Phoenix's words settled over the assembled leadership. These were people who had spent decades managing the machinery of warfare, but Phoenix's words suggested possibilities that extended far beyond their experience. Major, Secretary Williams said finally, are you telling us that you're no longer entirely human? Phoenix considered the question with the kind of careful thought that suggested she had been wrestling with it for 3 years. I'm telling you that the definition of human is about to evolve. The pilots who survive the next phase of warfare will be those who can think at the speed of light, who can process information faster than any conventional human, who can fight battles that would be impossible for unenhanced pilots. And you believe this evolution is necessary? I believe it's inevitable, Phoenix replied. The question isn't whether human consciousness will merge with machine intelligence. The question is whether we'll guide that merger or let it happen without our input. General Morrison returned to his seat, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that would determine the future of military aviation. Major, I'm going to ask you to do something that goes far beyond your original mission. I'm going to ask you to help us develop these technologies under our own control. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect our national interests, Phoenix replied. But I need to make something clear. The clock is ticking. The war I'm talking about isn't a distant possibility. It's happening now, and we're running out of time to prepare for it. The conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of a secure communication device. Secretary Williams answered with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested he was accustomed to interruptions that carried the highest levels of urgency. "Yes, Mr. President," he said, his voice carrying the deference that suggested he was speaking to the commander-in-chief. "I understand. We'll be ready." As he ended the call, his expression suggested that Phoenix's story had attracted attention from the highest levels of government. "Major, it seems that your return has created more interest than we anticipated. The President wants to meet with you personally." Phoenix nodded, understanding that her demonstration at Incirlik had set in motion a series of events that would ripple through the highest levels of command. "I understand, sir, but I need to make something clear. Whatever decisions are made, they need to be made quickly. The war I'm talking about is coming whether we're ready for it or not." William's expression grew troubled. "Major, how much time do we have?" Phoenix looked out the window at the Potomac River, but her consciousness was clearly processing information that existed beyond the visible landscape. "Based on the development timeline I observed during my training, I estimate we have maybe 6 months before the first wave of enhanced pilots becomes operational. Maybe less. 6 months to prepare for a war that will determine the future of human consciousness. 6 months to decide whether we want to guide that evolution or let it happen without our input," Phoenix replied. "The choice is ours, sir, but we need to make it soon." As the assembled leadership processed the implications of Phoenix's words, the weight of impossible decisions settled over the room like a shroud. Outside, Washington, D.C. sprawled endlessly toward the horizon, but everyone in the room knew that the future of warfare would be decided in the spaces between human and machine consciousness. The war for the future of humanity had already begun, and they were running out of time to choose which side they would fight on. 3 months after Phoenix's return, the classified facility known as Project Prometheus had transformed from a theoretical research program into an operational training center for the next generation of enhanced pilots. Located in the Nevada desert, camouflaged among the test ranges and classified installations that dotted the landscape, it was a place where the future of warfare was being written by pilots who had learned to think at the speed of light. Phoenix stood in the briefing room facing 12 of the Air Force's most promising aviators, each one hand-selected for psychological profiles that suggested compatibility with neural interface technology. They were young, brilliant, and utterly unprepared for what they were about to experience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Phoenix began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had walked through the fire of transformation and emerged stronger. "What you're about to undertake will fundamentally change who you are as pilots and as human beings. The neural interface technology you'll be learning to use doesn't just enhance your capabilities, it transforms your consciousness." Captain Sarah Chen, a test pilot with 15 years of experience, raised her hand. "Ma'am, what exactly are we talking about when we say neural interface?" Phoenix activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional model of the human brain, neural pathways highlighted in blue and gold. "Direct brain-to-aircraft communication. Your thoughts become the aircraft's commands without the delay of conventional controls. Your consciousness merges with the machine's processing power, allowing you to think and react at speeds that approach computational levels." The assembled pilots exchanged glances that suggested they were processing possibilities that extended far beyond their experience. These were people who had spent years pushing the boundaries of what was possible in fighter aircraft, but Phoenix's words suggested capabilities that existed beyond the boundaries of their imagination. "The training process begins with neural mapping," Phoenix continued, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing routine technology. We'll scan your brain activity during various flight operations, identifying the patterns that will allow successful interface with machine intelligence. Lieutenant Marcus Rivera, one of the pilots who had witnessed Phoenix's impossible return, leaned forward. "Ma'am, what are the risks?" Phoenix's expression grew serious. "The risks are everything you think you know about being human. The neural interface doesn't just allow you to control the aircraft. It changes your consciousness, your thought patterns, your very identity as a pilot and as a person." "But you survived it," Captain Chen observed. "I survived it," Phoenix agreed. "But I also lost parts of myself that I can never recover. The person who went down over the Mediterranean 3 years ago died in that transformation. The person standing before you now is something evolved, something more than human but also something less." The silence that followed was filled with the hum of electronic systems and the distant sound of aircraft operations. These were pilots who had spent their careers accepting calculated risks, but Phoenix's words suggested transformations that went far beyond physical danger. "Ma'am," Rivera said finally, "why is this transformation necessary?" Phoenix activated another display, this one showing a global map marked with locations that suggested military operations extending far beyond conventional understanding. Because the war that's coming will be fought by pilots who can think at the speed of light. Conventional human consciousness isn't fast enough to survive battles that will be measured in microseconds rather than seconds. What kind of battles? Battles against artificial intelligences that think faster than any human, that can process information at speeds that make conventional reaction times obsolete. Battles against enhanced pilots who have accepted the transformation and learned to fight as extensions of machine intelligence. The implications settled over the room like a weight that pressed against the boundaries of human understanding. These were pilots who had spent their careers mastering the art of aerial combat, but Phoenix's words suggested futures that extended far beyond their experience. "The choice you're facing," Phoenix continued, "is whether to remain human and accept obsolescence, or to evolve and retain relevance in a war that will determine the future of human consciousness." Captain Chen stood and walked to the display, studying the global map with the kind of professional interest that suggested she was seeing familiar territory. "Ma'am, how do we know that this evolution is worth the cost?" Phoenix joined her at the display, her expression suggesting someone who had learned to see the world through the eyes of enhanced consciousness. "Because the alternative is extinction. The pilots who survive the next phase of warfare will be those who can think at the speed of light, who can process information faster than any conventional human, who can fight battles that would be impossible for unenhanced pilots. And if we choose not to undergo the transformation,